Robert Wise, a visionary filmmaker of the 20th century, left an indelible mark on cinema with his diverse array of films spanning multiple genres. From the iconic musical West Side Story to the timeless science fiction classic The Day the Earth Stood Still, Wise showcased his unparalleled versatility and directorial prowess. His keen eye for detail and storytelling finesse captivated audiences, earning him accolades and critical acclaim throughout his career. Whether exploring the depths of outer space or the complexities of the human heart, Wise's films continue to resonate with audiences, standing as enduring testaments to his cinematic legacy. David Starrett is a film critic, author, teacher, and scholar. He is most notable for his work on Alfred Hitchcock and Jean-Luc Godard, and his many years as the film critic for the Christian Science Monitor.
Orson Welles and Robert Wise were both like kids in their middle 20s when when Citizen Kane was made.
Wow.
And Orson Welles, I think, with his co-script writer Herman Mankiewicz, had everything really planned out, and I think he knew exactly what he wanted. And I think that Wise was, to a large extent, simply following Welles's orders.
Mm-hmm.
However, he was following them really well, and he was getting a really excellent edit. That movie, Citizen Kane, is very complicated. The plot is very complicated.
Right.
It jumps backwards and forwards in time,
Right.
and has so much going on in it that to edit that and make it flow and be cohesive is really quite an amazing thing.
It isn't enough to tell us what a man did. You've got to tell us who he was.
If I hadn't been very rich, I might have been a really great man. I'm Charles Foster Kane!
I think it was not successful in 1941, partly because it actually falls into a genre. It's kind of a newspaper movie.
Right.
And they were really popular in the 30s and in the 40s. And I think that, and also it's a kind of a biopic because people knew it was really based on William Randolph Hearst and so forth. And I think that it was just too weird for people who expected a genre movie. They expected a regular newspaper movie with Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant talking fast jokes. So I think that's the kind of thing they were expecting. When they didn't get it, they didn't go for it. But the movie, right from the beginning, although it was not financially successful, was recognized by other filmmakers as a real breakthrough in so many ways. And Wise's contribution was certainly essential to that.
Yeah.
After editing Citizen Kane,
Right.
and then after editing and doing a little reshooting for The Magnificent Ambersons, which made Orson Welles his enemy forever,
Right.
Wise went to work at RKO, a little studio without a whole lot of money and no real personality the way the larger studios had. And he worked on the Val Lewton unit, which made low-budget horror movies. And the whole idea behind that unit, that they made about 8 or 10 films that were horror films, is that, first of all, the budget was going to be really low. There were going to be no stars or anything like that. Boris Karloff was about as big as, and he's great, but he wasn't exactly, he wasn't no Clark Gable.
Right.
So no stars. And the idea was, too, to make them creepy rather than in-your-face scary. And then when the occasional fright moments did come, they'd be all the more effective.
Right.
So that was the method that the unit used, and there are classics like Cat People, for example, where a woman is walking alone at night through Central Park, and all of a sudden, and we're afraid that there may be a panther sneaking up on her, or a supernatural panther even.
Right.
And then it turns out to just be a coach that's going by on the sidewalk next door, but it really makes you jump. So Wise directed directed a couple of movies for that unit. He directed The Curse of the Cat People. He co-directed that because the guy who was directing it, Gunther von Fritsch, fell hugely behind schedule. So they said to Robert Wise, you got to come in Monday and take this thing over. And so they ended up sharing the directing credit.
Do you know why I came to you, Amy? Because you called to me. And I came. So that your childhood could be bright and full of friendliness. But you must promise never to tell anyone about me.
Not even Daddy or Mommy?
No. This must be a friendship that only we shall have.
Why, Daddy, you know my friend, too.
You couldn't know this woman. She died before you were born.
Oliver, please, let's not go on with this. The child's trembling. If that child comes here again, I'll kill her. Yes, I'll kill her.
Mrs. Fallon! Mrs. Fallon! Mrs. Fallon!
Oh, little girl. I have to hide you. I'd have to hide you, little girl. My little girl is in her room, waiting to kill you. We mustn't let her find you.
And it's really a very delicate little movie. It's not even a horror movie at all, despite that title. It's more story of an over-imaginative little girl and a kind of a supernatural but sort of imaginary friend who visits her on a regular basis. But Wise also directed The Body Snatcher for that unit. And here you have Boris Karloff as the star, who is a guy who is going out and robbing graves at night. And when he runs out of graves he can rob, he kills people to get cadavers to supply to the great physician who wants to dissect them. And Bela Lugosi is in it as well, in a smaller part. And here, Wise, it was one of the very first things he ever directed. And here he was making this marvelously effective movie with a lot of dialogue in it, occasional scenes of violence which are handled in extremely tactful ways that make them not tame, but spooky, but creepy. They kind of work on you in a smaller way, but for a longer time. And they just really work beautifully well. So Wise had this sort of apprenticeship in this horror movie unit, making sort of 1.5 horror films. And then I think he never completely lost his taste for that genre. His best-known horror movie is surely The Haunting, based on Shirley Jackson's novel, The Haunting of Hill House, and it stays fairly close to the novel. And Wise brings in all kinds of the things we associate with the classic horror films, but they're so beautifully done. There's shadows, there's unseen places, there's little corners you didn't know were there. There's a whole lot of ambiguity as to whether we're really dealing with spooks or just with crazy people who think that there are spooks, and this kind of thing. And of course, orchestrating a marvelous cast to go through all this. So it's a really good example in a later decade when things were starting to get more explicit on the screen of still going for that creepiness rather than in-your-face shock effects.
God, it knows I'm here.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
Now look, Doc, we're buddies, okay? But don't try to convert me.
I'm trying to prepare you. My name's Marquay, Dr. Marquay, a scientist interested in the supernatural. The unnatural, if you like. I came to Hill House to find the key to another world. Assisting me in this exploration of the unknown was Eleanor, Nell, who could look back into the past, and Theo, something of a witch who could see into the future. This is Luke, who didn't believe in anything, until evil, patient and waiting, made him change his mind.
Stop it! God. God. Whose hand was I holding?
How many of us take seriously the things we cannot or do not want to understand, simply because we are afraid?
Eleanor, you fall! Did you hear me calling?
Oh, this house. You have to watch it every minute.
The Haunting was produced and directed by Robert Wise, brilliant producer of West Side Story. The stars consist of a cross-section of top talent in the world of entertainment. Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, Richard Johnson, Russ Tamblyn. What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace? That some houses, like Hill House, are born bad?
Definitely one of the best films that Robert Wise ever made. And one of the things that makes it so extraordinary is the character of Barbara Graham as played by Susan Hayward and as developed by Robert Wise and the various people who worked with him on the screenplay and so forth. The character played by Susan Hayward is a real frolicsome, devil-may-care, I'll think about tomorrow, the day after tomorrow kind of a character who enjoys life. That's why she wants to live. So she really enjoys it. But at the same time, she's into some pretty dark stuff. And then, of course, that completely turns on her and makes her life into a nightmare and kills her.
Right.
So bringing those two things together, I think it's a legendary performance, and I think deservedly so, because of the way that both Susan Hayward as an actress and Robert Wise as a director managed to make both of those parts of her life, which are going on pretty much at the same time, the frolicsome, I'm a bad girl and I love it side, and the I'm really involved in some horrible stuff that could turn on me at any minute, and then it just did stuff. Make those two things fit together so perfectly that we watch the whole movie without being made uncomfortable by that, although there certainly may be things about the story that make us uncomfortable.
Graham, hands above your head.
They'll all die violently. The spies, the liars, all the ones who want me dead. I'm innocent. All I can think of was that I couldn't prove my alibi. And I was going to the gas chamber, and I was
Mrs. Graham,
desperate.
you'll have to...
Have you ever been
Graham,
desperate?
Mrs.
You
Graham.
know what it's like. Damn!
All right, let's
Get your bizarre!
Now, Barbara,
Oh,
let
let me
yourself. Come on,
Damn you! Damn you! Damn you!
Wise felt I Want to Live was a statement against capital punishment,
Right.
and which was something that mattered a lot to him, and is why he lavished so much meticulous care on the death chamber stuff, the whole build up to it, the preparations for it, the delays that she had to go through, the torture of hoping that she might get a reprieve or a commutation of her sentence. So all of that stuff was really, really important to him. Wise said that he was agnostic as to whether or not the real-life Barbara Graham actually committed the murder or not. Critics of the film have said that the movie strongly suggests that she was innocent and was just railroaded. Personally, I think that the movie is, if anything, suggests very much that she was innocent, and I don't think that Wise was successful if he really did try to make it very even-handed in that way. But as a statement on the theme that mattered to him, capital punishment, it's very direct.
Right.
The Day the Earth Stood Still is another movie that Robert Wise made with a real purpose in mind, which was world peace. You know, to make a movie that was truly an anti-war movie, but interestingly, it's not a war movie, it's a science fiction movie. Another genre he kind of liked, he made the Andromeda Strain many years later. The Day the Earth Stood Still was made before, the movie that changed everything in science fiction was not Star Wars, although its impact has been vast, but 2001: A Space Odyssey, the Stanley Kubrick movie, which had special effects that were more detailed and more different from what anybody had ever seen before than any other director had ever even attempted, and used high technology to really extraordinary effect, even though it's a very slow-moving film and it's not using high technology the way so many more recent science fiction and horror movies do, just to sort of bash us over the head with all kinds of effects. So 2001: A Space Odyssey changed everything in the late 1960s. The Day the Earth Stood Still was made considerably before that, and so to today's viewers, it's going to look very low-tech, kind of old-fashioned. But in fact, that's part of its method, because it's a science fiction movie that wants us to think much more than thrill to the action.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Drew Pearson. We bring you this special radio television broadcast in order to give you the very latest information on an amazing phenomenon: the arrival of a space ship in Washington. The Army has taken every precaution to meet any emergency which may develop. Just a minute, ladies and gentlemen, I think something is happening.
I came here to give you these facts. But if you threaten to extend your violence, this earth of yours will be reduced to a burned out cinder.
But he's a robot. Without you, what could he do?
There's no limit to what he could do. He could destroy the Earth.
All vehicles, close in. Let's go.
And again, he's got a marvelous cast. Some people claim that there's a kind of a metaphor for Christianity in it, because there's a character who's called Mr. Carpenter, and we have this alien who lands on the Earth, and he has this huge robot with him named Gort, played by a guy who was something like 7.5 feet tall and had to stand around in this huge robot suit all the time. And they have come to tell Earth that the intergalactic community is going to punish Earth very severely if we don't stop our warlike ways and all that kind of thing. So Wise was very serious about that purpose, and what he succeeded in doing was making a science fiction movie which is really absorbing. It is designed to make you think, and it does make you think. It's also a very human drama. It's got characters who are caught up in their own lives and who then get caught up in this whole alien thing. But I think the influence of it has gone on and on and on. There have even been other movies with titles like that, The Day the Earth Caught Fire and that kind of thing. Wise did like science fiction. I mean, maybe his most famous one is still The Day the Earth Stood Still, but he went on to make much higher tech movies when he made Star Trek: The Motion Picture and when he made The Andromeda Strain. The Star Trek movie was, of course, building on an unbelievably popular TV franchise. And you look at those old TV shows, the original Star Trek series, and they look really creaky and, spaceships made out of cardboard and stuff. Well, it's not quite that bad. But it got along on story and on ideas and on a marvelous cast who people just fell in love with. So Wise had his work cut out for him to transfer all this to the big screen. And I remember when I saw that movie back when it came out, I thought this movie has got the screwiest metaphysics I've ever seen before in the movies. You know, about what's a human and what's a machine and all of this cockamamie stuff. But it's fun. And it was not Wise's most lauded film. It was not even his most lauded science fiction film. However, it did start the Star Trek motion picture franchise going. And so in that way, it was really very successful.
Right.
Robert Wise has worked in so many different genres for so many years, and he's worked so successfully in so many of those genres that it's kind of prodigious. Right. Little did he know, however, when he was starting out in the 1940s, that in the 1950s, these young Europeans, people from France and Switzerland, were going to develop something that came to be called the auteur theory, where you look for a director's personal signature in movies. And directors who work in a jillion different genres can kind of throw a monkey wrench into that. Hitchcock, obviously an auteur, because A, he has a personal style, he has themes that mean a lot to him that he continually explores, and they're almost all thrillers, his movies. Howard Hawks is a little more difficult, because he made westerns and war movies, and he also made comedies and musicals. But people found a connecting thread among all those films, too. What is, I think, identifiable as a personal stylistic signature in Wise's work is something that he carried over from his very earliest days as an editor, an assistant editor even, working with Orson Welles. Very short period of his time, not a happy period because he and Welles ended on very bad terms. However, deep focus. The way that everything in the shot, from almost up to the camera until way, way, way back there, is in focus at the same time, which was not the rule in the 1940s. Right. And in fact, it was not the rule in a lot of movies since. And something is happening. Something is meaningful. Maybe not action going on, but something's meaningful on all these different levels from front to back, so that you're not only composing a frame the way you would a picture from this side to this side and getting the proper elements in there and the movement and so forth, but also that as you see back, it's meaningful. So just for one example, in a movie like The Haunting, this is crucially important because even if not much is happening in the foreground, there are those shadows. There's that space back there. Something could be brewing back there that's going to be sprung on us soon. And this is something that I think you see over and over again in his movies. And there's even, I think, a little sort of a stylistic tick that you can detect in Wise's work, which is little borrowings directly from usually Citizen Kane or sometimes the Magnificent Ambersons. Yeah. You know, when you go into that house in The Haunting and you see this splendid old mansion, it happens to be haunted, the way it's filmed with the deep focus, everything in focus, and all of this ornate stuff, it's not unlike the Amberson house that we see in the Magnificent Ambersons, which is also this ornate place, and it's filmed in similar ways. It's camera position, it's camera placement. So I think that those things stayed with him forever, and there are even little nods to those movies. In I Want to Live, when the main character, played by Susan Hayward, is on trial, we see some guys in a newspaper plant, and they've made up two different headlines, and one says, "Babs innocent." And we think, oh, the trial must be over. They found her innocent. But then somebody lifts up the other one and it says, "Babs guilty." And it's the same thing in Citizen Kane, where one newspaper headline that they've made up says, I think it's Kane elected, and the other one says fraud at polls. So there are little things like that that I think you can trace directly back to his earliest career. The great heyday of film noir was from the middle 1940s up until the middle 1950s. And, you know, there were certainly noirs made after that, too. But we think of it nowadays as largely a 40s and early 50s sort of cycle of films. It's really a cycle, not a genre, because various different genres would sort of plug into noir. And I always describe noir as dark, shadowy movies about dark, shadowy people doing dark, shadowy things. It's all about betrayal and treachery and violence, stuff like that. So Wise was really good at this kind of thing, and he made movies like Born to Kill and The House on Telegraph Hill, which is very much a noir. He made a movie called Blood on the Moon, which is a western, but was sort of promoted as a film noir western. Well, they didn't use the term film noir in those days, but it was promoted as a movie in that vein, even though it was a western, and it's certainly thought of that way today.
Blood on the Moon, a peril-packed saga of the grazing lands, of stampeding cattle and ruthless men who ride by day and kill by night. Blood on the Moon, starring Robert Mitchum, who dares invade a Gunsmoke barricade, an adventurous stranger with several notches on his gun, but none on his conscience. What do you want?
Sorry about your son, Mr. Bond. You can believe that if you want to.
Barbara Bel Geddes, who can hold back a man with a bullet or hold him close with a kiss.
You'll go now, unless you want more of that.
I don't want more of it, Jim. But I won't go.
Robert Preston, the man behind the unrelenting range war.
I've seen dogs wouldn't claim you for a son, Tate.
Here is breathtaking adventure, rough, rousing, roaring, to match an absorbing love story as daring and exciting as the old pioneer West.
So he made quite a lot of movies in that vein, and interestingly, you can almost see Citizen Kane as the first film noir, because one thing that noir had, they were usually in black and white up until the very last days of the great noir cycle. They were in black and white, they were very shadowy, they had very strange and jagged sort of camera angles, and very often stories that are full of flashbacks and stuff, and a lot of psychological uncertainty. All of that is there in Citizen Kane. So again, Wise at the very beginning of his career was kind of going in this direction just because he got a job working on Citizen Kane. But then he started to make a lot of movies that were noirs of his own, and he just proved to be really well suited to that. For example, some of these movies would have fights in them, and Wise spoke about this. It wasn't something that happened by accident. He was quite proud of it. You know, usually in the movies, the hero waves his fists a couple of times and the bad guy sprawls back, and then the bad guy waves his fists a few times in the air, and it goes on, and you can tell nobody's really getting hurt, and at the end, nobody has a smudge on their face, and they're not breathing hard. So Wise said, why does it have to be that way? It really shouldn't. Fights are brutal and damaging, and at the end you're really exhausted. So he filmed fights that way. He started to after a certain point. And this was something that was unusual even in film noir, which were dark films, that's what the term means. So that he would have a couple of guys going at each other and punching and breaking chairs over each other's heads, and by the time the thing was over, they looked beat up, and they were exhausted. They could hardly stand up. And so this was a very interesting area in which Wise kind of innovated. And later on, when he made boxing movies as well, and the setup is sort of a boxing film noir, and then even later on when he made Somebody Up There Likes Me, which is more of sort of a big sort of post-noir production.
But a woman knows how to reach even a tough guy.
Come on, we're late for a wedding. Come on.
How can you ask me to go in a courthouse building?
That happens to be where people get married.
Well, being in courthouses makes me be uncomfortable, definitely.
Rocky, you're giving me a lot of reasons why not. But I still haven't heard the one thing that would convince me.
What's that?
Just tell me you don't love me.
A self-made rebel like Rocky is not an easy character to play. It takes great acting to do it. And great acting is what Paul Newman delivers.
But I'm going to tell you something, soldier. There's no place in this man's army for a wise guy. Do you understand that?
Wait a minute, you bum. I mean, you may be a captain and all that. You don't impress me so hot. You're so tough, come on outside.
Soldier, are you just plain crazy?
Maybe I am crazy with being sick and tired of this creep joint, but at least I ain't yellow.
The best thing that ever happened to Rocky was Norma. Gentle, loving, and so warmly played by Pierre Angeli. You can't help admiring this street fighter who lifted himself out of a world of hoodlums and crime and wound up a legitimate guy.
Well, what about them other guys smearing it all over the front page? What a rat I am. What a liar. What a no-good East Side bum I am. Sure, a Graziano, he's a no-good criminal, a coward, a yellow rat. Remember that. Graziano's the scum of the slums. He'll never...
Stop it! Maybe the real reason I love this picture so much is because the only person that ever hit Rocky and got away with it was a woman.
You know, I've been lucky. Somebody up there likes me.
But even in movies like this, he would choreograph the fight scenes really carefully so that it wasn't just get the guys up there and have them flail away at each other and we'll use a few cameras and we'll get some footage and we'll edit it together and it'll come out. It was like, you know, we're going to plan each one of these shots so that we have a whole scene choreographed like a ballet before we even start shooting it. And you can tell, you know, not because they look elegant, but because they look real. West Side Story is a fascinating case, and I must say I still have both the Broadway original cast album and the motion picture soundtrack album, and I say album, they were like LPs back in mine. I still have them playing in my head part of the time. And of course the story is Romeo and Juliet transferred to basically the slums of New York. And so we have these two, white and Latina, who fall in love with each other, and their family and their gangs are all opposed to this. And so the whole concept of the show is really ingenious. And Arthur Lawrence wrote this really effective script that brought all the elements together and brought things up to a huge climax. And then Leonard Bernstein composed the absolutely astonishing music, which I still think is among the best work that he ever did. So Robert Wise has this phenomenally important Broadway show, and also a little bit controversial, because some people felt, especially if you put this into a movie, people are going to see this in other countries and they're going to think America is just full of people knocking each other out and stuffing each other in garbage cans, you know, and having sad endings, you know. So it was a little bit controversial too. Wise was able to get the great choreographer Jerome Robbins to do the choreography, and for a while Robbins was even supposed to direct the movie. But then it turned out that he wasn't really going to be able to handle directing a movie of such enormous size and scale. And so a deal was worked out where he would work on the choreography and kind of work on the whole movie, but Robert Wise would really do most of the directing, except in the dance sequences, and they ended up sharing the directing credit, and in fact winning awards shared as well.
Unlike other classics, West Side Story grows younger.
All right, now, come on. Shoot it, man, shoot it.
You hoodlums don't own the streets. Go play in the park. Keep off of the grass. Get out of the house. Keep off the block. Get out of here. Keep off the oil.
get down on the street is nothing.
Unlike other classics, West Side Story grows younger.
And I remember when I saw West Side Story back when it first opened, and I was running a little bit late, and a friend of mine said, "Don't go if you're going to arrive a minute late, because you don't want to miss that opening shot." So I hurried, and I got there, which is, an aerial shot from a helicopter that just way over New York. And what it does is, and Wise was very aware of this, it's not just a fancy shot to catch your eye and let you know the movie has started. Seeing New York from the air like that has a certain abstraction to it. It's all these angles. And of course, that's what dance is all about. That's what ballet is all about. And it's tough enough to do dance numbers in a movie like Star or a movie like The Sound of Music, although like in the case of Star, they're all what's called motivated dance numbers or songs. That is, every time somebody sings or dances, it's because they're doing it in a show or they're rehearsing something, so it fits in the story. But West Side Story is more just one of these old-fashioned musicals, even though it's not old-fashioned at all, but in this way it is, where people just suddenly start singing. Like, they're sitting around the living room and then suddenly somebody starts singing and there's an orchestra playing. So Wise really worked hard on that, because it's okay if you're making Singing in the Rain to have this sort of not make any sense, because the whole movie is a comedy and everybody knows you don't take it seriously. But West Side Story was a very serious and dark story in a lot of ways. Even though it has a lot of great comedy, even though it has magnificent songs, it's real dark. So you couldn't have that awkwardness. And so Wise worked very hard on these transitions into and out of the songs and production numbers and dance numbers and so forth. So it was a tough job to pull off. And of course, he had Robbins there to provide a lot of important assistance. But I think that the way Wise pulled that off is really quite extraordinary. Robert Wise also made war movies, and he made movies about military people, and he made movies about boats under the water, Run Silent, Run Deep, and on the water, The Sand Pebbles. In a movie like The Sand Pebbles, where he has a really large cast and a really long running time and a really complicated story, the challenge, and this calls on his editing background, I think, a great deal, as well as his directing skills, is to integrate the whole thing so that it's clear to the audience all the way through. And in fact, in The Sand Pebbles, even though so many people totally admire it, Wise himself didn't feel it quite worked. he felt it was a little too complicated. And there were one or two sort of subplots that he would have just cut out if he were making the movie a few years later on, when he kind of looked at it in retrospect.
Robert Wise, whose West Side Story won the Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Direction, whose Sound of Music won the Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Direction. Robert Wise, two-time Academy Award-winning producer-director, now crosses half the globe to the heart of the Far East to turn his camera on a completely new vista, the exciting world of adventure. You are there, sharing the enormous emotional impact of Richard McKenna's prize-winning bestseller.
Shoot some!
You share the incredible adventures of these powerful, deeply human characters, whose courage became a legend in this fabulous land.
We're mixing our lives together, Maylie. We'll never be able to unmix them again.
You are swept along with them, from China's ancient rice paddies to Shanghai's teeming bund, from the bandits of Tung-Ting Lake and the Yangtze River to the pleasure haunts of Hankow and the seamy hideaways of Changsha. The camera has never captured such visual excitement, such a vast, revealing spectacle of the Orient, of an American gunboat patrolling its troubled waters, and of the handful of strangers caught up in its intrigue.
He is a murderer! He killed a Chinese woman who was carrying his child!
Steve McQueen as Jake Holman, the young, restless outsider, and Candice Bergen as Shirley Eckert, who understood this land she loved, but not the man she wanted.
It ain't gonna work, Shirley.
Why? It's good up there, Jake. It can be a good life.
Richard Attenborough as Frenchie, tough, hardened, but capable of the heights of tenderness. And Marriott Andriani as Maylie, the haunting beauty of many pleasures. Prize for the highest bidder.
I'll do what you want. You bought me.
I didn't buy you. I don't want it to be like that between us.
And Richard Crenna as the captain, whose tiny gunboat held their lives and their loves in the balance as it suddenly achieved world importance.
We will make one last savage thrust deep into China. And if San Pablo dies, she dies clean.
Years in preparation and production. A continent in revolt as its locale. Thousands upon thousands in its cast. Here is the master of the art of filmmaking, Robert Wise, at his best. Here is an unparalleled emotional experience.